Let me open with something that changed how I think about this work. Studies of audit failures consistently find that the majority of problems trace back not to bad testing, but to bad planning. The auditor tested the wrong thing, in the wrong place, at the wrong time. The execution was flawless. The aim was off. And here is the part that stings. Planning is the cheapest phase of an audit and the one everyone rushes. Think about it like this. If a surgeon spends 30 seconds looking at the scan and 4 hours operating, would you feel good about that ratio? Probably not. And yet, that is roughly how many audits are structured. So, what will this chapter give you? You will learn to prepare an audit plan that actually holds up when reality pushes back. You will run a pre-audit risk assessment so you know where to point your attention before you spend it. You will build a realistic schedule, request the right documentation, and write interview questionnaires that get honest answers rather than rehearsed ones. Then we go deeper. You will learn to understand business processes as they really run, map accountability, review the data lifecycle end-to-end, identify high-risk processing, and conduct data flow walkthroughs that reveal what no document ever will. By the end, you will be able to walk into an organization and see it clearly. Let us begin. So let us talk about the audit plan, and I want to start by dismantling something. Most people think the plan is a document. It is not. It is a set of decisions. The document is just where you write them down. Here is what those decisions are. What are we trying to find out? Where will we look? Who will we talk to? What will we accept as proof? How long do we have? And what happens if we find something serious halfway through? Answer those 6 honestly, and the document writes itself. Now, let me tell you what a bad plan looks like, because I wrote one. Early in my career, I planned a 4-week engagement, assuming I would get documents in week 1. I did not. I got them in week 3. My entire testing window collapsed into 5 days, and I delivered work I was not proud of. What did I learn? Build slack into the plan. Not because you are lazy, but because organizations are slow, and that is not a surprise, it is a certainty. Second thing, your plan should name the decision points. Where would you stop and escalate? If you find evidence of an unreported breach in week 2, what then? Decide that now, calmly, not later in a panic. And here is my favorite test. Show your plan to someone who was not involved. If they can tell you what you are doing and why, it is a plan. If they say, so what exactly are you checking, you have written a schedule and called it strategy. So, before you plan where to look, you need to know where the danger is. And that is what the pre-audit risk assessment does. It is a smaller, faster exercise than people imagine, and it pays for itself every single time. Here is how I approach it. I ask 3 questions, and I ask them of the organization, not of the documents. First, where does the most sensitive data live? Not the most data, the most sensitive. Health, financial, children's data, identity documents. Second, where has something already gone wrong? Past incidents are gold. They tell you where the cracks are, and cracks rarely heal on their own. Third, where has nobody looked recently? Neglect is a risk factor all by itself. Let me give you a real example. Before an audit at a hospitality group, I spent one afternoon on this. I learned they had migrated their booking platform 8 months earlier. They had a minor data exposure during that migration which they handled internally, and nobody had reviewed the legacy system since. Where do you think I pointed my testing? We found guest records from the old system still live, still accessible, still unencrypted, sitting quietly where everyone had stopped looking. One afternoon of asking. Weeks of testing saved. Do you see the point? The risk assessment does not tell you the answer. It tells you where to spend your curiosity. Now let us get practical, because a great plan with an impossible schedule is just a wish. Here is the mistake almost everyone makes. They schedule based on their own availability and completely ignore the organization's rhythm. So they book the finance team's interview during month-end close, or they request IT evidence during a system upgrade, and then they act surprised when nobody shows up. Let me tell you about a scheduling disaster I caused. I once scheduled interviews with a retail client's operations team in the 2nd week of October, which, in India, is roughly when every retail operations person on earth stops sleeping because of the festive season. I got 3 cancellations and 1 very tired manager who told me nothing useful. So the first rule, ask about their calendar before you build yours. Second rule, sequence matters more than speed. Do not interview the data protection officer first, interview them last. Talk to the people doing the work first, gather what is actually happening, and then go to the DPO with specific questions rather than general ones. Otherwise, you get the official version and spend the rest of your audit trying to unhear it. Third rule, leave gaps. deliberately. Because every good interview generates two new questions, and if your schedule is packed, you will have nowhere to follow them. A schedule with no room is not efficient, it is brittle. So, let us talk about the document request, which sounds like the most boring part of an audit and is secretly one of the most revealing. Here is why. What you ask for shapes what you get, and how they respond tells you almost as much as the documents themselves. Let me explain. If you send a request saying, please share your privacy policy, you will get a PDF, useless. But if you say, please share the privacy notice as it currently appears to a customer signing up on your mobile app today, along with the date it was last changed and who approved it, now you are asking a real question. I once made a request like that to a client, simple enough. 3 days later, I got a reply saying they were still trying to work out which version was actually live. That reply was my first finding, and I had not even arrived yet. So here is my advice. Be specific about the artifact, the version, the date, and the source. Ask for the thing as it exists in production, not as it exists in the compliance folder. And second, watch the response. Fast and complete tells you one thing, slow and partial tells you another. A document that takes 3 weeks to produce is not a document anyone uses. One more tip, always ask for something you already know exists. It calibrates you. If they cannot produce that, you have learned something important about everything else you asked for. Now, interviews, and I want to be honest with you here, this is a craft, not a checklist, but preparation makes the difference between a conversation and an interrogation. Here is the trap. Most auditors write questions like, do you have a process for handling data deletion requests? And what do you think the answer will be? Yes. Always yes. You have just wasted a question and learned nothing. So flip it. Ask, walk me through the last deletion request you handled. What happened first? Do you see the difference? One asks for a claim, the other asks for a memory, and memories are much harder to fake. I use this constantly. On a banking engagement, I asked a service manager to describe the last correction request. She paused, then said, honestly, we usually just tell the customer to visit a branch. That single sentence undid 4 pages of documented process. Second technique. Ask the same question of different people, not to catch anyone out, but because the gaps between their answers are where the truth lives. If the policy owner and the person executing describe 2 different processes, you have found something real. Third, always leave your last question open. Something like, what would you fix if you could? People will tell you their own findings if you just give them room. Prepare the structure, then be willing to abandon it. So, we are moving now from preparing to understanding. And this is the phase where good auditors slow down and mediocre ones speed up. Here is what I mean. Every organization has 2 versions of itself. The documented version, which lives in process maps and standard operating procedures, and the actual version, which lives in habits, workarounds, and things people do because the official way is too slow. Your job is to find the second one. Let me give you an example that I still think about. A client had a documented onboarding process for new customers. Beautiful flowchart, 7 steps, approval gates, all of it. Then I sat with an onboarding executive for 1 hour and just watched. She skipped step 4 entirely, every single time. When I asked why, she said, oh, that system has been down since March, so we just email the details to the team directly and they enter it manually. 4 months. Personal data flowing through email, not in a single document anywhere. So how do you find these things? You watch. You sit beside people, you ask them to show you rather than tell you, and you ask the magic question, what do you do when the normal way does not work? Because the exception is not the exception. Under DPDP, the exception is usually the risk. Now let us talk about who is actually responsible, and I want to warn you this gets slippery fast. Here is the pattern I see constantly. You ask an organization who owns privacy and they point at the org chart. There, that box, the data protection officer. But here is the question that matters. Does that person have authority or just a title? Let me tell you about a client where this became painfully clear. Their DPO was a genuinely capable person, 3 levels below the executive team reporting into IT. She had flagged a serious issue with their marketing data flows 4 times. Documented, in writing, escalated. Nothing happened. She had responsibility without power, which is not accountability. That is just blame waiting to be assigned. So what do you look for as an auditor? 3 things. First, reporting lines. Who does the privacy function report to, and can that person be overruled by the business they are meant to check? Second, decision rights. Can privacy actually stop something, or only comment on it? Third, evidence of exercise. Has the function ever said no to anything? If the answer is never, that is not harmony. That is absence. Here is my line for this. Accountability without authority is theater. and theater does not protect anyone's data. Follow the power, not the org chart. So now let us follow the data itself, from birth to death, and I promise you, this is where audits get genuinely interesting. Think of personal data as having a life. It is born when it is collected. It grows as it is enriched and combined. It travels, sometimes further than anyone realizes. It ages, and eventually it should die. Should. That word is doing a lot of work. Here is what I find over and over. Organizations are excellent at the birth. Collection is well designed, forms are neat, notices exist, they are reasonable about the middle, and they are absolutely terrible at the end. Let me give you an example. An insurance client walked me through their life cycle confidently. Collection, verification, underwriting, policy issuance, servicing, claims. Then I asked, and then? And there was this pause. And someone said, well, then the policy lapses. So I said, and then what happens to the data? Longer pause. The data just stayed. Forever. 20 years of lapsed policies with health declarations, income details, family information. Nobody had ever written a final chapter. So when you review the life cycle, walk it in order and refuse to skip the ending. Ask at every stage, what triggers the next step? And critically, what triggers deletion? If nobody can answer that last question, you have found your finding. Data that never dies is a liability that never stops growing. So, we have walked the life cycle. Now let us find the parts that should worry you most. And here is the thing, high-risk processing is not always where you expect. People assume it is the biggest database. Often it is not. Let me give you my working list. Watch for processing that involves sensitive categories, so health, finance, identity documents, biometrics. Watch for anything involving children because the bar is higher and the consequences are worse. Watch for large-scale automated decisions because errors scale instantly. Watch for data shared with third parties because control weakens the moment it leaves. And watch for anything combining datasets because combination creates information nobody consented to. But here is the one people miss. Watch for processing that has no owner. Let me explain with a case. An e-commerce client had a customer analytics pipeline, sophisticated, valuable, combining purchase history with browsing behavior and location. I asked who owned it. Marketing said, that is data science. Data science said, we just built it. Marketing uses it. IT said, we only host it. 3 teams, 0 owners. That pipeline was the highest risk activity in the entire organization, and it appeared on nobody's risk register because it belonged to nobody. So ask the ownership question early. Orphaned processing is dangerous processing. Alright, so we come to my favorite technique in the entire audit toolkit, the data flow walkthrough, and I will tell you why I love it. Because it is the one thing you cannot fake. Here is what it is. You take one real piece of data and you follow it. Not the process, not the diagram. One actual record. Let me show you how this works. At a telecom client, I picked a single customer who had signed up 2 weeks earlier, just one, and I said, show me everywhere this person's data went. We started at the app, then the onboarding database, fine so far, then it replicated to a data warehouse, still fine, then it fed a customer service platform hosted by a vendor, getting interesting, then a subset went to an analytics tool, then that tool exported daily to a spreadsheet on a shared drive, and then someone said, oh, and the collections team pulls from that, 6 systems on the diagram, 9 in reality, 2 of them outside the country. Do you see why this works? A process diagram shows you the intended path, a walkthrough shows you the actual one, and the difference between those two is your entire audit. So here is my advice. Do this early, pick one record, follow it stubbornly, refuse to accept, and then it goes to the system as an answer. Ask which system, hosted where, accessed by whom. Follow the data, it will tell you the truth.